Hi everyone, and welcome to another Heroes and Bosses painting video. This time I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to get your goblins from Massive Darkness painted and on the game board. I'm starting off the same way I did with the dwarves by priming the goblins with Karak White from Games Workshop. Next, I've picked out 3 colors that I plan to use for the skin. I've decided to go with Rakarth Flesh and Elesian Green from Games Workshop and Filthy Suit from Army Painter. For all the colors I'm using in this video, I'll be using a wet palette. This is going to help keep my paints from drying out, which is handy when you're batch painting minis like this. And it will also let me do quick touch-ups for any mistakes that I make as I go. After I add each of my colors to the palette, I'm adding a small amount of water to thin out the paint. The goblin warriors that I'm painting now have skin exposed on the face, their upper thighs, the hands, and the elbow of the right arm. As I was painting, I noticed that these miniatures don't have particularly well-defined features, so I had to thin my paint more than normal so I didn't end up concealing some of those features. The goblin archers only have skin exposed on the face and arms. They also have a single, small protruding tooth on the lower left side. Try to avoid covering this with paint so you won't have to go back and paint it white later. After the skin is done, and while I still have the skin tones on my palette, I'm going to paint the eyes. I always mess up the eyes the first try, but I'll have the skin tones to correct any errors. For the eyes, I'm using Wild Rider Red because it stands out well against all 3 skin tones. I'm not painting a pupil on these guys, just a simple red eye. Next, I'm going to paint the scale mail armor that all these guys are wearing using a light gold color. I'm creating this by mixing equal parts Glorious Gold from Vallejo and Shining Silver from Army Painter. In the character art, all the armor has a bit of a bronze look to it, but I wanted some more color variation. All the scales will be painted with the gold, and the plate armor will be painted with a silver color. The warriors only have scales hanging from their helmets, but the archers have scale around their necks and hanging from their waists. Next, I'm going to paint all the leather bits on these miniatures. For this, I'm using Mournfang Brown from Games Workshop. The goblins have what looks like 3 bird skulls attached to their helmets, so I'm trying to avoid painting over those, since they're going to be painted white later. The archer's armor is mostly leather, so I'll be using this brown for their bracers and armbands, their helmets, and their boots. There isn't a whole lot of leather on the warriors. They have 2 straps across their chest, one at the waist and one on their back. The next thing I'm going to paint is all the fabric of their clothing. I'm using 3 colors for this, and I'm just going to mix and match those 3 colors on the goblins' clothes. I am, however, avoiding using the green color on the green-skinned goblins. The 3 colors I've chosen are Mephiston Red and Eshin Grey from Games Workshop and Ordic Olive from P3. Sometimes when you're using a wet palette, your paints can get quite thin, especially if they're sitting on the palette for a long time. So you'll likely need at least 2 coats for these larger sections of the miniature to get good even coverage. On the warriors, there are 3 main sections of fabric. There's a large skirt hanging down in the back, and there's a separate piece of cloth under his shield. In the front, he has a long loincloth. You could speed your process up by painting all of them the same color, but I want each one to stand out from the others. I'm going to repeat the same thing on the archers. Their main areas of fabric are a collar on top of their shoulders, their skirt, and a sleeveless tunic. So here you can see how I've randomized the color of the cloth for each of the warriors and the archers. Next, I'm going to be using Balor Brown for the bows and the shields. Balor Brown is my go-to wood color if I'm going to be using a lot of dark shading. I'm also using this color for the straps along the quivers and for the shafts of the arrows. It's hard to tell what the shields of the warriors are made of. They're covered in tiny divots, so it could be corroded or dented metal. I've also seen this kind of pattern on wooden shields that are covered in a layer of leather or rawhide. I'm going to paint mine to look like the latter, since there's already a lot of metal on these warriors. I'm also using Balor Brown on the grips of the weapons. For all the pouches on their belts, I'm going to use a light tan color. All of these are a good choice, but I'm going to go with Hammerfall Khaki from P3. I'm also using this color on the quivers. The archers have 3 pouches in the back and 1 in the front. The warriors only have 2 pouches, 1 near each hip. Next, I'm putting 2 silver colors on my palette, Pig Iron from P3 and Stormhost Silver from Games Workshop. I'm using Pig Iron for nearly all of the metal on the goblins, starting with the tips of the bows. On the warriors, I'll be painting the weapons and nearly all the armor with Pig Iron. The only thing I'm not painting is the knee and elbow armor and the crossguards on the weapons. The knees and the elbows are going to be painted with the Stormhost Silver, just to break up the armor a bit. If it's all one tone, it's hard to see the different parts that make up the armor. I'm also using the Pig Iron to paint the shield spikes. So here you can see that the warriors are covered mostly in armor. The next thing I'll be doing is painting the knees, elbows, and crossguards with Stormhost Silver, along with a few other small details. The goblins all have buckles on their belts or shoulder straps. I'm also painting these with the Stormhost Silver. The archers have buttons on their pouches, and I'm painting these with silver as well. The final detail to be painted are the bird skulls on the helmets and hanging from the archers' waists. For this, I'm using Vallejo's Ivory, though any white or off-white will do. Whenever you're using quick shade, the key is to try to use colors that contrast well with each other, so they don't blend together after the quick shade is used. Now that all the base colors are on the goblins, it's time for the bases. I'll be using the exact same method I used for the dwarves. First, I'm putting down a little bit of random texture using Stirland Mud. Once this had about half an hour to dry, I'm going to use some watered down Steel Legion Drab to paint over the entire base. Again, I'm letting that dry before dry brushing the Stirland Mud with some Karak Stone. I'll finish up the base by painting the rim a dark grey. I'm using a 50-50 mix of Eshin Grey and Abaddon Black for this. Here are the goblins finished and ready for shading. Make sure they've had plenty of time to dry before hitting them with the Army Painter Quick Shade. I always use Strong Tone Quick Shade, and as you can see, that's the one I'm opening right now. My method for quick shading is to dip the miniature in about halfway, and then spread the quick shade around the rest of the miniature with a flat brush. You want to make sure that you've also covered the entire base and rim with a quick shade as well. And finally, I'm using a smaller, sharp-tipped brush to clean up the pools of excess quick shade and wiping that onto paper towel. At some point in the future, I'll do a video of all the tools and techniques I use for quick shading. There's a lot of little details that can really improve this process. Next, you want to give your miniatures at least 24 hours to dry and then spray them with a matte varnish. This time, I'm using Tester's Dull Coat. And here's the finished product. If you want to play a role in deciding which miniatures are painted next, check me out on Patreon. If you found this video useful and want to see more, please hit like and subscribe. And as always, I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you very much for watching.